Hockey season is right around the corner, and to celebrate, we've got a big four-part season preview that we are starting today with at Jackets insider Jeff Svoboda himself. So that's what's coming today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you news, stories, fun, yelling, ranting, all of the above and more about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. I'm just going to adjust my hat because it's wonky and that's annoying me. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day, despite the fact that I'm currently editing this podcast at 5:16 p.m. in Eastern Standard Time. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Maybe this is your first listen of the day, and if it is, I appreciate you. If it's not your first listen of the day, I still appreciate you. Today, like I said at the top of the show, we're going to be talking to Jeff Svoboda. He is the Jackets insider, the Jackets beat reporter for the team, friend of the show. He's been on a couple of times before. He's come to do a big kind of breakdown of the offseason, talk about Brad Larsen's first season as head coach, the departures, the additions, and looking forward to the future of the team. And we talked for like a full hour. So we're going to split that into 3 or 4 parts, depending on how it breaks up. And that should get everyone ready for training camp, which starts today, and the season, which starts in like 5 days, or the preseason, I guess. So I'm very excited about that. I'm super excited about this conversation. Jeff is a delight, as always. So I'm just gonna get right into it because he says things much better than I can, and I'll just let the conversation play. So somehow it's almost the preseason for the Blue Jackets and the NHL in general, and I realized that we hadn't checked in with friend of the show Jeff Svoboda this offseason yet. So I thought, hey, let's get Jeff on and let's just have a chat about last season, the offseason, all of the excitement, and everything that's kind of coming up. So big preview for Locked On Blue Jackets this week. How's it going, Jeff?
It's going well. Busy times here. It's good to get back. Training camp starting this week. Open practice, preseason games, etc. There's not much downtime when training camp starts. It's just pedal to the metal from the very beginning, and it's exciting time because we're just really a handful of days away from the season opener and then the home opener in middle of October.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I feel like this offseason has kind of simultaneously been really short and also really long. Like, I was thinking about this, and the offseason, I guess, has only really been going for like a month and a half, if you count, the end of free agency up to preseason. But also, the Blue Jackets haven't played a game since, the start of April? So that's, almost 5 months, and it's weird. Time is weird.
Yeah, time is weird. It's funny. I've talked to a lot of people who have felt that way, and I would actually disagree. I feel like it was a long off season. I felt like I kind of enjoyed myself. You get the time to kind of relax and do the summer stuff and hang out with friends and play a lot of golf and all that stuff that hockey players and hockey people like to do. But now we're at a point where I feel like there was a lot of downtime there. Now it's time to get started. Talking to some players, they kind of feel the same way. They are sick and tired of training and the stuff that they do in the offseason, especially for a team that didn't make the playoffs. Maybe it's a little different if you're Colorado and you were playing, Stanley Cup games in June. As you said, the Blue Jackets haven't played since April. They're ready to go. All the training's done, and now it's time to do what the real fun is. The training camp's not necessarily fun, but you're actually back playing real hockey, which is what these guys would much rather do than just work out and stuff like that in the offseason.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You can only go to the gym so many times,
Yeah, exactly.
But I want to talk a little bit about last season just before we kind of get into the kind of the crazy offseason that the Blue Jackets had, because it was kind of a transition season, I think. And so I was wondering, if you had any thoughts on, do you think the Blue Jackets overachieved last season? Because that's kind of the feeling I got from a lot of people, was that everyone expected the Blue Jackets to be just awful, just terrible. And they actually were not good. Obviously, they didn't make the playoffs. They ended up picking 12th overall with their pick. But I still think that the Blue Jackets were better than a lot of people expected them to be.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And yeah, they probably didn't exceed expectations by a ton, but they did exceed expectations. I think most people thought this was a bottom 10, if not bottom 5 team in the NHL going into last season, just based off of preseason polls and things like that. And I think they were picked by, the Athletic did its poll of the Metro, and I believe Columbus was picked to finish in last a season ago and didn't even come close to that. But at the same time, they were in the playoff race until March. They had a strong February that got them back within shouting distance of the playoffs. But let's also be clear here. This team finished, 19 points out of the last playoff spot. That is essentially 10 games out in an 82-game season. They were not particularly close to making the playoffs either. So
coming up in a minute, I've got more of my conversation with Jeff. But first, I've got to tell you about BetOnline because BetOnline is where the game starts. If you want the best props, odds, and lines, BetOnline is the place to go. They are your number one source for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports information this season. You can find football developments, game matchups, news, podcasts, and they are your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. If you want to bet on MLB, the MMA, boxing, golf, the NBA, which comes back soon, the NFL, college football, and most importantly, the NHL. You can bet on all of those things and more at betonline.net. So make sure you head to the website today. That is betonline.net. Or you can use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action because betonline is where the game starts.
It is interesting. It does feel like they overachieved. They lost some games down the stretch where, once the trade deadline passed, it was pretty clear they were not going to be a playoff team. And so it was, as much about getting some young guys some looks and things like that as it was about winning. So they did not win a lot of those games and probably finished a little further out than they were there for a time. But at the end of the day, though, they have to get a lot better to be a playoff team. So, yeah, it is funny to look back. And on the whole, I would say they probably did overachieve. But they're 12th. As you said, they had the 12th overall draft pick. And so that means, you were closer to being in the bottom 10 than you were to being in the playoffs probably. So, yeah, it just kind of shows as exciting as last year was because I do think they got a lot of things out of last season. They still have a long way to go to get where they want to be. And so it will be very interesting to see just how much adding a player like Johnny Gaudreau and the Eric Goodbransons of the world and some of the other things they did, they should on paper be a better team than they were a year ago. But what will that mean when all is said and done? It'll be very interesting to see how that all shakes out this upcoming year.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely want to get into, all of the additions and the subtractions that the team had this offseason. But I wanted to how did you feel about Brad Larsen? His first full season as an NHL head coach? I think a lot of people were exceeds expectations maybe, but and everything I saw from Brad Larsen, everything he was saying, I was like, yeah, this guy gets it. Like, I feel like he did a really good job in his first full season as an NHL head coach. How do you think that he did?
Yeah, I would have to absolutely agree with that. And he's the guy that Blue Jackets had known for a long time for being an assistant coach to John Tortorella for his the entire tenure of Torts. So he'd been actually was brought in by Todd Richards, the previous coach. I believe Lars had 7 years as an assistant coach. I believe he had 2 years as a head coach, 2 years as an assistant down in the minor league system, and then 7 with the Blue Jackets. So he had been in the organization for essentially 11 years. He was here before Torts. He was here before Jarmo Kekalainen. So it just goes to show you that I think all along there was a tremendous amount of respect in the front office, and not just this front office, but the previous front office, as the kind of coach Brad Larsen was. He was a guy that doesn't really seek out the limelight, and so, and really assistant coaches at the end of the day are not generally focused on by the media. So the only thing people knew him for was that he ran the power play under Torts, and let's be honest, the power play under Torts was generally not very good. And so I understand why fans were kind of like, who is this guy? But as you got to know him, you got to see him as a coach, there was already a tremendous amount of respect for him in the building. But I think it only grew last year. People ask, is he a player's coach? Is he, a demanding coach? I think it's funny because hockey tends to vacillate. You hire a guy that's a real get on there, chew him out, get him inspired, kind of a domineering, sort of like Torts kind of vibe guy. And then when that ends, you hire the players coach, and you just go from one to the other, one to the other. That just seems like the hockey thing. But I think Lars really is both. He inspires a tremendous amount of respect for him. But I think he also takes the player needs and since he's done it before, he played in the NHL. He was coached under a lot of very good coaches. He takes what the players. I think he does a lot of things in mind to trust the players and have a lot of belief in the players. But boy, the second that he sees that they need a course correction, he is the guy that's there. And that happened a lot last year. And honestly, this season could have really spiraled out of control last year. They were not very good in the months of January and December. A once promising start to the season. Remember, they were 12-6-0 or whatever. And then really there were some bleak times there in December and January. And really, I think the one that kind of topped that off was they got down to Florida. They beat Carolina 6-0 in Carolina. 2 nights later, they lose 9-2 at Florida. And that was a loss that Brad Larsen looked at and said, this is not what we are. We cannot do this. And he was hard on them for a good week or two there, just kind of trying to right the ship. And then they came out in February, and when they did right the ship, they were very good. So I think he has a good feel, does a really good job of towing that line between, demanding a lot out of the guys, demanding a culture of getting better every day, while also not being kind of that overbearing, grind the guys down kind of coach. And so I really like the way he approaches things. I think, if you talk to players, and of course players are always going to say, oh, we love the coach because, it's,
what else are they going to say?
But I honestly think they mean it. I think there's a lot of respect in the room for the way Brad Larsen runs a team and his feel for, what they need in certain situations. And so, X's and O's wise, I think there were some issues where, I think they'd like to get better as far as that goes. But to me, as an NHL coach, the biggest thing is how do you steady the ship? How do you keep it going throughout an entire 82-game season and handle the ebbs and the flows and the ups and the downs? And I think Brad Larsen did an exceptional job at that in his first year.
In a minute, I've got more of my conversation with Jeff. That's what's coming up next on Locked On Blue Jackets. Something that kind of since the exit interviews really is and something that I've kind of thought about a lot this offseason is a lot of the players in their exit interviews talked about how much fun they had this year, how good the room was, how much they enjoyed playing in Columbus this season. And I know there's Torts gets a lot of stick for being a guy that people don't get on with. And I think a lot of that is kind of overblown by the media. We've talked about that previously. You've always had pretty good conversations with Tortorella, but I was wondering, and this might not be something that you can give an answer to necessarily, but how much of the team enjoying themselves and having fun and, talking about how good the room is, how much of that is, you think, due to coaching change, due to maybe some kind of player movement? Obviously, there was a lot of new faces in the room this year, some unexpected departures. Do you think that there was something there in terms of, do you think there was a concrete change that you can point to as to why this year seemed so fun and the season before kind of didn't really seem like everyone was enjoying themselves?
Yeah. I think that group, and they had a good group there for a while. A core of the Nick Folignos, Cam Atkinson, Seth Jones, David Savard. There were other guys that kind of came in and out, Sergei Bobrovsky being among them. But that was kind of the core group in that room for a long time, starting, some of those guys all the way back to the 2014 playoffs, but certainly through the 4 straight years of making postseason runs from 2017 until 2020. And that group had some pretty good moments. They had a season in 2017 where they were in the running for the President's Trophy. They had the 2019 season where, they obviously beat Tampa Bay for that playoff series win and pushed a very good Boston team, pretty strongly. Even 2018, they had a very good team, but lost to the Stanley Cup champions in the Caps in that first round. Where a series they probably, if they scored overtime goal in Game 3, they win that series. And so they were probably 1 goal away from, beating the team that ended up winning the Stanley Cup. And so, even though that, in that run, they only really won 1 playoff series. That team was probably better than people give it credit for just because of the opposition it ran up against. But at the end of the day, when they got into that late in the 2021 season, which was pretty much a disaster, there's not much dancing around it. That team just was not a good team. And it led to the trades of, late in that season, Nick Foligno and David Savard, who were about to be free agents. And then the next offseason, Cam Atkinson and Seth Jones. It just felt like it was time to turn a page. And I think John Tortorella felt that there was time to turn a page. And he's a guy Say I love Torts. I have nothing bad to say about Torts. I think as you said, a lot of the kind of chatter about Torts is a bit ill-informed. He's not always, say there's the vibe that he comes in and is knocking over a locker room or knocking over trash cans and yelling at everybody on a daily basis, and that's just not the case. He's earned that reputation in a lot of ways, but I think people got along with him a lot more than it gets let on. But at the end of the day, he also is the kind of guy that takes up a lot of oxygen in the room. I mean, if you're in a room with John Tortorella, I think you're in a room with John Tortorella. And I think after 6 years of that, there's going to be a lot of player turnover. And I think Torts kind of also realized, like, maybe it's time, that message and that presence is not, sinking in, and it's not what it used to be. It's just not landing the same way that it once did. And so it's probably time for me to move on. And so that led to so much turnover. In a lot of circumstances kind of coming together, leading to them having a new head coach, a new coaching staff, new leaders, new captain, et cetera, going into last season. And it just kind of was a breath of fresh air because, I said that previous run had just kind of reached its end. It was new last year. Guys really did get along. Someone like Jake Voracek was so happy to be back here, fit right into that room. Boone Jenner stepped into the captaincy and seemed to lead in a way that people really responded to. And so I think there was a sense that team did get along very well. It's a lot of factors that went into it, but they were all very on the same page about how much they really liked being around each other. Patrick Laine kind of blossoming last year, and I think the personal troubles he went through, his teammates being there for him through that really kind of helped him fit in the room. So I think a lot of things just came together for that to happen. And that doesn't mean anything was wrong previously before. It was just time for a change, and that change was a breath of fresh air for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, like, and I've talked to a couple of friends about it, and they were like, when this all came out, they were like, man, what was so wrong with the room the season before that this is, like, it's so much different with just one or two things. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense of sometimes it's just time to change. And I think having a lot of new people, obviously, you didn't mention guys like Sean Corrali, who got to come home and play in Columbus.
Yeah.
Jack Russellvik, obviously he was here last season, but he really had a great season this season. Columbus-born Cole Sillinger, there was a lot of Ohio boys on the team, and I think that really helped. And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow, we're going to be continuing this conversation with Jeff. We're going to be talking about the offseason and how that went for the Blue Jackets, because the answer is pretty darn well. So that's what's coming up on tomorrow's episode. We're going to be doing this for the next 3 or 4 days, depending on how the episodes ended up splitting up and whether any breaking news happens, etc., etc. But tomorrow, we're going to be talking to Jeff a little bit more. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked on Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms, also over on YouTube. Trying to hit 250 subscribers by the time the regular season starts on like the 8th of October. So if you're not subscribed, then please feel free to hit that subscribe button. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the podcast at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.